Okay, so the Mishnah in Kinim, and this is Perek Aleph, Mishnah. We're up to Perek Aleph, Mishnah Aleph, second half of the Mishnah here. Starts Seder Kinim Kachu. Here's the Seder of Kinim. Ha-choiva echad chatas ve'echad olam. So what does a cane mean? A cane means a nest. Ki yikare kan tzipor. Okay, where do nests come into anything over here? Because the Mishnah, I'm not sure where this use started from, but we have this idea that a set of a carbon of birds, so for example, Zav, Zava, Yoledis, in other cases, we read about it in Parshas Vayikra. Sometimes if you can't afford the bigger carbon, you bring birds as a carbon. You have to bring two birds. So we call that a cane, a nest. Right? We don't call a carbon of a sheep, we don't call it a barn, we don't call it a zoo, but the carbon of birds is called a cane. So at least partially because you're bringing two birds. So it's not just a bird, it's a matzav. It's a bird nest. That's as much as I can understand about it. You'll see it gets actually pretty complicated because where does this concept of cane come from? As I just said, because sometimes you have to bring a carbon chatas and oila. That's called chayva. That's a carbon chayva, and that's echad chatas v'echad oila. But then a person could also bring a cane as a neder or nadava, meaning not because she had a baby and she can't afford a sheep, not because a guy went into Beis Hamikdash and can't afford the animal carbon, but because he wants to bring a neder. He says Rahiya lai oif or Rahiya lai cane, and in that case kulam oilas, because you can't bring in the chatos as a neder nadava. You can only bring as a neder nadava an oila or a shlomim, and a shlomim can't come from an oif. So mele, when it comes to neder nadavas from birds, it's only oilas. Okay. So seder kinim kachu achayvach chatas v'echad oila b'neder nadavas kulam oilas. And why is it important to know this with this Masechta? Because what Masechta is going to talk about is what happens in cases of taruvis. Okay? And taruvis, you have different cases of taruvis. You have a case of taruvis of chayva b'chayva. That means you have one set of two birds, let's call a set, a cane. It's two birds, one's a chatas, one's an oila. You can have another set that also one's a chatas, one's an oila. What happens if those get mixed together? Or what happens if a set that's a chatas and oila gets mixed up with another set that are both oilas? That's another shayla, right? So mela, we have to first establish the various kinds of kinim. Kinim is a nest or a set. Someone's at the door. Let me get it. We have to establish the various kinds of kinim that come up in the Masechta. Two types of nests. One is if you're mechuyev to bring a carbon, that's a chatas. Another one is if you say, I'm going to bring a carbon. Now, there's something very interesting to notice over here, which I don't think we're going to go into. That where did the whole concept of a cane come from? Because the Torah says that sometimes a person has to bring a chatas and an oila. If you want to bring in a dava or a neder and a dava, you can bring one bird. In the Gemara, in Krisis and in Zvachim, you can bring one bird. Why? Because it says in Parshas Vayikra, im min ha'oif karbanoi, v'hikri min ha'torim min b'nei hayoina, v'hikri voi, which is singular, and you should bring it. So that it's called a Prida. Prida means one bird. It's called a Prida. So you could bring as a neder dava, you could bring a Prida. One bird. So why bichlal is there even a concept of a cane for a neder nadava? Why does it even exist? Okay, yes. I mean, you want to say why does this case even exist that a person can say Rahiya like cane? The whole cane, remember, that's a halachic concept. Yes, a cane means a nest, but it's a halachic term since there's something called a carbon which is made up of a set of birds, two birds. So we give it a new name called a cane. But the concept of a set of birds only exists by chayva. By an adava and a neder, you could bring one bird if you want. If you say Rahiya like two birds, bring two birds. But why would there be such a thing as Rahiya like cane? Which there is. The Mishnah says in the last parak. The Mishnah talks about this is the last case. The last Mishnah. From a halachic perspective, so two things. I'm asking why would someone use that language? And more than that even, if a person says Harei like Cain, let's say there wouldn't be a concept in the Torah of two birds, right? And the guy says Harei like Cain. So he needs a doctor. I mean, what does he mean?
Sure, but
or we can start figuring out what does he mean. Oh, how many birds are usually in a nest? I don't know. Whatever.
Okay. I hear you. He said a flock.
Right.
Okay.
Let's say guys Harei like flock. I don't know. And there's no such case in the whole Mishnah. It's Harei flock. What do you mean by flock? It's not case. Go. It's whatever. It's for the Yene guy who's gonna write a sefer for Nidre Carbon Kilchasa when Mashiach comes. It's gonna be a big thick sefer. And one of the cases will be Pamacha someone said Harei like flock and whatever. It was a hell of a Okay, fine. But it's not a Mishnah. Harei like Cain. The Mishnah talks about why? Because the halachic thing called a Cain. But the halachic thing called a Cain exists by carbon chayva. By carbon nedva, there's no such thing called a Cain, conceptually. So why is it even appear in Mishnah? Again,
that I don't know, because once it exists, it exists.
So that's a the answer. I mean, the Mishnah, the case actually comes up in Masechet Kinem, in the last Mishnah of Masechet Kinem, which talks about a case. Ha'isha she'amra harei alai Cain kisha zocha. Woman's pregnant. She says, you know what? I accept upon myself that when I have a baby boy, I'm going to bring a Cain. Now, wait a second. Isha has a baby. Shema has to bring a carbon. So now when she has a baby, she has to bring shtei kinim. Echad lenidra, ve'echad lechayvasa. So I think in terms of just understanding the development of why this is being called a Cain, I think the Isha is talking a little bit to Drake. She knows this concept of bringing a carbon when you have a baby. She's like, you know what? When I have a baby, I'm going to bring you a Cain. Like, oh, now you have to bring an extra one. So I think that could be the answer. Like you're saying, in other words, the Cain starts from Chayva. Once it's a thing called Cain Chayva, the other starts using it and saying, oh, that's a beautiful mitzvah. I want to do it myself. You want to do it yourself. Now it's already two oilers. It's not a chatzan oiler because chatzan oiler come, So it's piggybacks, of course, on that's the answer.
Yeah.
Very good. And the difference in chatzan and Chayva and what's it called is Chayva is chatzan and oiler, and Nidba is both oilers. Okay. So here's what I want to talk about. And we'll focus on this aspect. The Mishnah says that anytime you bring a set of birds as a chayv, it's one chatas and one oila. Nachon? There's an exception to this. And that exception, I think the Rav talks about it already. See the Rav, he's talking about carbon ager. I think it's there. Let's see. Yeah, it's here on the second line for the bottom. So let's read the Rav. Say the kinim shel chayva echad chatas v'echad, right?
Say the kinim shel chayva echad chatas v'echad. Kigoyin zav v'zava v'yeladas v'tumas v'kadesh
v'kadash. Go to B'Sabikdash.
V'shmiyas kol.
Okay. Bunch of cases you have to do both. Yeah. Right.
Cain.
They have to be a Cain, right? One chatzon oil. Whether they're poor or rich, and some of them only bring it if they're poor. Fine. Right. Oh, there you go. Now we have a problem. Frek the Rav, and this comes to the Rambam. So the Mishnah says a Cain chayva is one chatzon oil. Frek the Rambam, and the Rav takes it from the Rambam. When a ger is megayer, so everyone knows he has to do milah and tefillah, right? But there really also has to bring a carbon too. Okay, the Raisa. And what carbon does he bring? Cain, birds. We'll soon see. He could bring birds. He could also bring an animal if he wants. Okay, but if he brings birds, he has to bring two birds, two oilers. So that conflicts with the Mishnah. The Mishnah says Cain chayva sechet chatas sechet oil. Okay, so yeah, that's the problem. So the Rav. So what's the answer? Not so common. Geras is not so common. Geras is not so common. What?
Meet the lost tribes. I guess
yeah.
We're more.
Marushach. When I'm a couple game with Mashiach, the game that when this guy be Mordechai Esther is not as a patient. One man says not chal because they weren't doing the shem shemayim. You don't really take gerim when things are going great for the yid. And when things are not going great for the yid, it's like shit. So the kids are. All gerim is not supposed to happen.
Historically, it also kind of worked out that way.
The what?
There's a bunch of examples like the Kuzari, where the whole society decided to. Also,
so that was What do you mean? So there was a whole 100,000 kazars had to bring birds or something.
But the point is, it didn't work.
Didn't work. Why? What happened to them?
There's examples where these people.
What happened to them? We don't know.
Well, there was some obscure place in Yemen also where they became Jewish. The kings decided they were Jewish, but then.
Oh yeah, what's the place?
It didn't last. It didn't stick. The point is,
the kids are Gears Nish Pasha.
100 years later,
Gears Nish Pasha. Anyways, the Ma'aseh Shloshia. That's his answer. That's the Rambam's first answer to this question. Okay, what's the question? The Mishnah says, "Kinim chayva zechat chatz zechat." He found a case. Someone has to bring a carbon, and the carbon that he brings is birds, or could be birds. That's an important distinction. We'll get to soon. But when he brings his birds, which he must bring, 2 birds, like this. Steer to the Mishnah. Okay, you know what? It's lo shchiach. And just to explain to you a little bit what that means. Okay, the Ma'aseh Shloshia, but the Mishnah says, the Mishnah is saying a rule. The way the Rambam phrases it, this Masech is not talking about that carbon, because in other words, you know why this Mishnah is here? This Mishnah is here not to tell you hilchis, karbanos, eifus in general. This Mishnah is here as a hakdama to the Masechta, which is going to talk about taruvis. So really the purpose of this Mishnah is to set us up for thinking about 2 kinds of groups. One group is chayva, one group is nidava, and this is how we're going to define chayva. This is what we're going to define. We can define it loosely because that's not the point of it. The point is just to give you 2 sets of kinim that we'll have to talk about what happens when they mix. So we'll leave out the case with shliach. If it would be shliach, then you might say, "What do you mean? How's we should leave it out?" We're given that it's shliach, so you know what? Asak Masech Zu. We'll worry about that later. But that's not the point of it. Okay. So I want to tell you 2 questions. Let's start with a question. Okay. The question goes like this. There's another case of someone who has to bring birds, which may also be in conflict with this Mishnah. How's that? The Rambam zok in Hilchas Chagiga. Shloshim Yom K'rein L'Chag. I have to start learning Hilchas Pesach. Almost Shloshim, whatever. But anyways, Hilchas Chagiga. So when you come to the Oile Regel, come to Beis HaMikdash, you have to bring Karbon Oila, Karbon Chagiga, and Shalmei Simcha. Karbon Oila means what? It means when you walk into the Azara, so mitzvah say, to come into the Azara, and when you come, you have to bring a carbon. Yeah? What carbon must you bring? Says the Gemara in Chagiga, I think it's Daf Zayin, before Gemara, it has to be animals, not birds. Can't be birds. You have to bring Karbon Oila. It has to be animals, not birds. The Rambam says in the Chagiga, Perek Aleph Halacha Aleph, Yavi Ima Karbon Oila, Bein Min Ha'if, Bein Min HaBehemoth. The Rambam says you could bring birds too. Okay? First, Gemara says you can't. Everyone's with time on this. Because Mishnah, maybe I'm Devik so there's that. Different shmuz. Doesn't concern us right now. The fact is, the Rambam says the mitzvahs Yirah calls the churcha v'lo Yirah panarekam mitzvah which will this very soon. You could bring, if you want, you could bring a bird. Havada Behim is nicer, bigger. Ishkamat Nasiyadai. But you can bring a bird. How many birds do you bring? 1 bird or 2 birds? Big shayla. Why would you say 1 bird? Why not? Torah says what? Oh, so here's where things get tricky. Is this a nidava? No, you have to bring a carbon. It's not a nidava. You have to. See, this is getting a little tricky. I don't know if we'll get to that shoes. Because maybe, why do you think it's a nidava? Because you were thinking like this. It's not the pshat that you're mechuyev, like, oh, yeledes, karban chatos, you don't do anything. When you come to Beis HaMikdash, bring something, bring epis, bring an adava. You're mechuyev to bring an adava. That's like, you're onto something here. No, this might be a mahal. But we'll get to that soon. It's very, very, I don't know if we'll get to that nikud that you're bringing right now, but let's talk the halacha l'maisa. Sefer HaChinuch says 1 bird. Ein l'davar shir, afilu goyz l'echad or ter echad, niftar, v'chavas. Sefer HaChinuch is a mitzvah tough pay test, this mitzvah. He also says you can bring birds, 1 bird. Mabit says you have to bring 2 birds. Why do you have to bring 2 birds? Because, why does a ger have to bring 2 birds, okay? Why does a ger have to bring a carbon b'chalal? Because the Torah says, Chiyagu itchem ger, something, a pasuk that says a ger has to bring a carbon. Okay. A carbon. Why does it have to be 2 birds? Says the Gemara increases. Because, Preidah achas yevsher. Can't be they should bring 1 bird. Why? Shloimatzino b'chol ha'Torah. Find the lashon over here. It can't be that a ger could bring 1 bird because you don't find such a thing. For example, you don't find such a thing. V'hikri voi, as I told you earlier, v'hikri voi, singular, in Parashat Vayikra says that you could bring one bird if you want. There is such a thing as one bird carbon. And for the Gemara, b'chayva mi aloi ashkechon. You never find one bird that comes as a chayv. So yes, you could bring one bird as an nadav. And that's what we talked about. Why does it even exist, this whole concept of a cane by a nadav? That was a shmuz we had before. But by a chayva, typically a case of chayva is like you read from the Rab, zav, they have to bring a chatas and an oilet. They have to bring two birds. A ger is also a chiyuv. Now his chiyuv is not chatas and oilet, because there's chatas, but it's a chiyuv. So it's got to be two. It's got to be two. So it has to be two oilers. Okay? Zoktem a bit. Oilas Rahiya. Also a chiyuv. Also a chiyuv. Same way, a ger has to bring two because chiyuv has to be two. Oilas Rahiya has to be two also. That's like mabit. Okay? So we have machlekes mabit and chiyuv. If oilas Rahiya has to be two or not. Okay? That's the machlekes. Yeah? Okay, machlekes mabit. Mabit says, you heard the mabit says oilas Rahiya has to be two. Chinuch says it can be one. Mabit says it has to be two. Why? Because if a ger has to bring two because the chayva, oilas Rahiya is also a chayva. So it's machlekes achronim whether achronim because it continues past the chinuch. Sameach or Simcha says for sure one. Mabit says two. Okay, it's against the machlekes, right? Now I want to ask one of shach kasha. Either way is shver to me. One or two are both shver. If oilas Rahiya has to be two, then we have a kasha from our Mishnah. Right? Our Mishnah says that when it comes to a carbon chayva, zechet chatas, zechet oilah. I fact Rambam ger is lo shchiach. What about oilas Rahiya? L'shitas Rambam is two birds. And that's shchiach. How do I know it's shchiach? Prove to you it's shchiach. Prove to you it's shchiach. The pasuk is shchiach, but prove to you it's shchiach. Because the Rambam paskins the Kiddush Acharish Perek Dalach, I think it is, and it comes from the Gemara in Sanhedrin, that you can use as a factor in the decision whether you should make it ibriyah or not. You can use as a factor something called a sad. That means it can't be a primary reason. The primary reason has to be it's not the spring yet, or two or one other thing. Paris, tkufa, right? The cheshbon is either way, whatever it is. The primary reason has to be based on very strong factors. You could have other things that sometimes contribute to the decision but not sufficient, and then there's 1 plus 1, whatever the cheshbon is on Sanhedrin. And one of those can be, as the Gemara says in Sanhedrin, gozlaya rekichin. The gozlaya, the birds were still babies. I guess the birds also, they have the seasons, right? And the birds are not big enough to be brought as karbanis. So what? So the Rambam explains, people need them for the oilas Rahiya. And by the way, Rameh Simcha brings that Gemara in Sanhedrin as a riot to the Rambam that you can bring an oilas Rahiya for birds, because otherwise, what's the big deal that there are no birds? So, okay, maybe let's say for the eldest. So maybe it's not your shver, because when did people typically, any karbanis that people were chayiv, they would typically bring them when they would come to the reg. So again, a guy who was a zav on Chanukah is anyways probably coming Pesach, he's going to be planning on bringing birds. So I don't know if it's so shver. But the Rambam, in Kiddush Acharish speaks out, the birds are for oilas Rahiya and for anyone else. So you see it is shchiach, because it's a reason to, in other words, it's typical for people to use birds. Because you're going to be ma'aber the shana, because you need birds, right?
No, you have to call it Oilas Rahiya separately, because if can I be yotzei my Oilas Rahiya with my
No. Because davar shebechayva in a balam and a chulin, which by the way tells me maybe that's not an davar. You see, the halach is since it's a chiyuv, you can't use something else with it. You have to. It's not. See, it's a little bit not like you're saying. It's not. You have to. You have to bring a special one for that, right? Which is suggest that you see what's saying. Suggests that it's not the pshat like you were saying before. That just don't come with nothing because you have to be. You have to be. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it's a separate carbon, and the Rambam says you can ma'abed the you could factor in that. We need to worry about the birds. Vice does that's shchiach. So how come it's not this masechta? Okay, Elamai tell me it's one carbon. Maybe it's one. Problem was saying it's one. Oh, 1 second. Let's get the kasha.
No, either way, it should have been brought down.
Huh?
Either way, it's shchiach, right? So. Either way, you should have.
No. The Mishnah is talking about kinim. The Mishnah is talking about one bird.
Okay.
The Mishnah only cares about kinim, sets of birds. Because the home set is about sets. But that's okay. 1 second. So let me see. Let's see. Elamai will say it's one bird.
Well, you don't have a chayv that's one.
You don't have a chayv that's one.
You said it already.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Yeah.
So that's the problem, right? So it has to be two. right? The same way ger is 2, this should be 2, right? Pashta, the same way ger is 2, that's what it says, right? And Mesim deals with that question. I'll tell you what Mesim says, right? So those are right. We have 2 problems. If you bring 2, how can it's on this Masech? How can it's on this Mishnah? And how can you bring 1? It's the Chayv. Right. The Chayv you should bring 2. So I just want to mention briefly what Mesim stats for that kasha. Mesim says Pasha to bring 1. The problem that that the Chayv has to be 2. So he says like this: whenever you, as I mentioned before, when you oil the regular, you have to bring another sweet. You also have to bring a chagiga. So he's and as Rambam says in the Chuz chagiga, kol shechai b'yirchai b'chagiga. What?
You do both one.
So Meisel says just like sometimes a woman brings 1 bird as a chatos and a sheep as an oil, and that's not called a double. It's a chayiv has to be 2. That's it is 2 because the animal here 2. It's coming together with the Shamach Hagig. So I find that very difficult because here it's 2 different mitzvahs. Shamach Hagig and us we have 2 different mitzvahs in the Torah. Shosh mitzvahs tavi sobrog. It's not 1 carbon in any way. By the yoledes, it's 1 carbon. In Purim regards, okay? So regards to your father, shkaya. By the yoledes, it's 1 carbon. 1 mitzvah. 1 mitzvah, 1 carbon, 2 parts. But by the chagiga, to say the chagiga and the oila on its tariff, so it's not considered that it's 1 thing, it's very short because it's 2 mitzvahs legamri. Okay. So here's what I want to suggest. I want to say.
It's probably not relevant, but if you brought 1 bird.
Yeah.
Let's say you're in Gary, you brought 1 bird, 1 island.
Right.
And you decide to bring a sheep.
Right.
So you just. So you don't have to bring 2 birds.
Well, you don't. Well, you can bring 1 sheep, but then once you bring a sheep, you go
right.
Sheep. Yeah.
But you do the bird first, and then you decide to do a sheep because you don't do a second bird.
Yeah.
So
Very good. Say that. Yeah, but then you already have the sheep. I mean, it's not right. Not doing anything.
Well, the point is you don't actually have to bring 2 birds.
Okay, but here's the thing. Okay, right. So that's an interesting thing. Right, that's what I want to get to. That's what I want to get to. I want to. That's you're getting onto something here. I want to show you first something that you won't see in the Rav, but the Taisis Yomtiv brings it down. See the Taisis Yomtiv on that same discussion. Do you see it? We talked about Gerim somewhere over around there. He brings the Rav. What happened to Gerim? He says Lo Shliach.
Let's see, where is it?
Here, I'll show you.
Right
around there. Yeah. Right here. First he brings the Rav. Kasav Rav. What happened to Gerim? Okay. Then he says some Drasha Tavis. That's another version. Another version of the Rambam. Okay. Another version of the Rambam said, and it's this. I'll show you in here. This one. Which another version is like this. What happens? The Rambam wrote the Mishnah. He wrote it when he was young, and he Mishnah is also true, but much more Mishnah. He went back and added things, and changed things, erased, added an aside. Okay. And in this case, the Rambam went back and added. He says, okay. It's rare. And then he added these 5 words. He added a new reason. Another pshat. Another reason why the Mishnah could leave that out is because those Karbon Ager. Now Karbon Ager is the first in Torah, but what the Ger brings as a Karbon on the first. It's Pashtas Riyah, and Talmud Tishra Kadosh. That's its Pashtas. Minatayim, B'nai Echad Chatzis. The first in the Torah bring birds. But a ger, Torah doesn't say to bring birds.
So that's why it doesn't have to be listed in the Mishnah.
So the Mishnah's talking about, the Mishnah's analyzing Teresh Machsav, what's my favorite, right? So I'm adding another reason, okay? Now, the first thing you have to understand about the Rambam didn't stam go back and he came up with another, he had a reason, it's fine, it's good, it's not shliach, but he has to go and say Begam. He went back and he added. Also, another reason, he had a new, you think he came up with 10 reasons. I'm saying he came up with a reason, he had this. And now, but notably, the second reason that the Rambam added covers Olas Riyah also. Because Olas Riyah also, the Torah doesn't say which carbon to bring, just to bring a carbon. Right? So why is carbon gear not in the Mishnah? If it's because it's not common, we have a Kav Prashat on Ziyah. But once you have the next reason that also gear is not in the Torah,
so
that
he just said, by the way,
that would help. That would help for Olas Riyah too. So I want to suggest that the reason the Rambam added this is because he holds that Olas Riyah comes 2, And the answer why it's not in the Mishnah is for a second reason. Second reason. Now, why would the Rambam be chayzer? Where do we see this chazal? Okay, meaning I'm just making it up. Speculative. The answer is this Rambam was chayzer about something else as well. Here, come over here. Let me show you. Because here you have to look at the kappa. Originally, the Rambam said, what do we have? Who could bring it? Because it's not common, right? Originally, what it said was not efsher shiyavi. It said shehu shteikin, which is. Right. So the Rambam originally said the Mishnah is not talking about Karban Ager, which is two birds, and he changed it to the Mishnah talking about Karban Ager, who could bring two birds. Right. And we have a similar change in the introduction to Seder Kachin, the Rambam wrote, where originally he wrote Karban Ager, who shtei soyim or shnei b'nei yayna. And then he added Tosefta that says, by the way, you can make an animal too. Right. To say the Rambam originally held that a ger must bring birds. And then the Rambam was chayzer and says a ger could bring birds and he could also bring an animal. Okay? Now, halt cup over here. Oilas Ra'iya, everyone knows, you could bring an animal. The Rambam holds you also let it bring birds. That's what Rambam says. For sure you can bring an animal. Ger, the Rambam originally held must bring birds, and then the Rambam holds you can bring animal too. Okay, so I want to suggest the following. What's the argument that Oilas Ra'iya has to be two birds? Because Azayiv, the Gemara says a ger has to bring two birds because it's a chayiv, and a chayiv less than two. Mm-hmm. So if the Gemara says that for a ger, says not a bit, the same thing has to apply for Oilas Ra'iya. Yeah. So I want to say it like this, very posh. Let's say a ger has to bring two birds. So that means a ger is not mechuyev in a carbon. Not that a ger has to bring a carbon, he has to bring a specific carbon. Birds. If you mechuyev, someone says Rahiya like carbon. Someone says Rahiya like, what could he bring? He can bring sheep, cattle, birds. If a ger has to bring birds, that means he's not mechuyev to bring a carbon oil, he's mechuyev to bring a specific carbon. Same if a guy's mechal Shabbos, he has to bring kispa or sira. All different cases, you have to bring certain, Talmud is this. Every carbon has a certain unique species. If the Torah says a ger has to bring birds, that means he's mechuyev in a certain kind of carbon. Mm-hmm. Now we have a question. Kind of carbon, is it one or two? Right? So we say, you know what? The kind of carbon of birds when it's a chiyuv is two. Okay? Well, what about Oilas Ra'iya? So I'm talking about, and the Rambam originally thought that a ger has to bring birds. It has to bring birds. Has to bring birds. You know what the Gemara means when it says Chayv al-Ashkan? It means, look, the Torah prescribes a certain kind of carbon. Birds. Doesn't tell us one or two. For that, we're going to use analogy and compare it to other cases where you must bring birds, because that's the analogous case, right? What about Oilas Ra'iya? Oilas Ra'iya, will you say the same logic that, if he brings birds, he has to bring two? No. You know why? Because Oilas Ra'iya doesn't have to bring birds. He just has to bring a carbon. So just because a carbon chayva has to be two birds, and Oilas Ra'iya is a carbon chayva, you're not going to plug in. How could you plug it in to the other cases where it's dafka din of birds? Oilas Ra'iya has the option of bringing birds. Yeah, you hear this one? So Beshlama ger. Let's imagine that before the Rambam was chayzer, a ger that has to bring two birds. So what do we compare it to? Other cases where two birds is a chayv. But Oilas Ra'iya, who's allowed to bring whatever he wants, he could bring birds or he could bring animals. So we're not going to compare when he brings birds to the case of a carbon which is prescribed after to be birds. There's no reason to compare the two. Because Oilas Ra'iya is the whole...
It's not like Yolad. Yolad is really two carbons.
That's two carbons.
You need two birds.
Yeah, it's two carbons, right. So, but by ger, where the Torah made a new chiyuv called birds, right. So we have to compare it, even though it's not quite the same. Right, it's not quite the same. Elamai, we need to figure out what is this carbon because it's a specific carbon. If the Torah prescribes a specific carbon, we have to figure it out. Yeah. So that makes sense. Let's look for the closest analogy. Mashenke by Oilas Ra'iya, it's bring a oila. Everyone knows an oila could be one bird. Look back at Mashenke. You're allowed to bring one bird as an adava. Okay, this is a chayla, that's adava, dishkefela. Because we're not looking to define the carbon. We know what the carbon is already, because it's a carbon. It's any carbon oila. But by ger, when the Torah made up a new carbon, it has to be birds, but we don't know how one or two. Now we have to define it. So we're going to define it based on the closest analogy, even though it's not perfect.
So whether it's birds or carbon,
What?
Is he bringing
Right.
birds or
Very good. Excellent. A ger brings birds, what happens to be an oilet. Or Rahiya brings an oilet, he wants to bring birds. He brings bird, but one bird. So originally the Rambam held that a carbon Olat Rahiya is one bird. Ger is two birds, yeah, because ger has to bring birds. So now why is Olat Rahiya and Olat Nanamseft? Because it's one bird. Why is ger Nanamseft? Because it's not shiur. Mm-hmm. Then the Rambam was chayzer, as we see, and said, you know what, a ger could bring birds, but it could also bring animals. Wait a second. Nonetheless, the Gemara says a ger has to bring two. If he has to bring two, even though his chiv is not birds, his chiv is on oila, like you said, and still has to bring two, so our Lesriya also has to bring two.
Right.
Maybe the Rambam had to add another reason that will cover our Lesriya too, because I'm a first in the Torah. You got it?
Yeah.
That's a shtickle. We'll leave it at that.
Very good.
That's the vart. So again, my maskana l'nyanenu for today is that taka or Lesriya, according to the Rambam, has to be two, and that's why the Rambam went back and had to give another reason why the Masechta doesn't deal with Gerim, because he had another kasha which he just left unsaid. Mameli covered it with the second reason, which is that the Masechta is not talking about those kinds of Karbanis that are not mefurish in the Torah. And Oilas Re'iyah, the Torah just says bring a carbon, doesn't tell you what to bring. That's what the Rambam went back and gave that second reason. What did the Rambam originally think? Well, I know the Rambam had a different chazara, because we could find also the Rambam was chayzer originally said Gerim bring birds, and then he said Gerim bring or birds or something else, right? So whether we plug in that Gemara that says that a ger has to bring two birds because it's a carbon chayva, whether we say, okay, so let's compare the same thing by Olas Re'iyah, which is also a carbon chayva, depends on the Rambam's chazar, because Olas Re'iyah for sure is only optional birds. So Raji Rambam held the ger is must be birds. That's when we compare to Yoledes.
Basically,
that's the whole thing.
What Ger proved, because you could switch animals, is that when you bring a carbon of birds, it has to be two.
Exactly. Even though the birds aspect is not really,
exactly.
Which is a chiddush. It's a chiddush.
You basically just doubling up.
Right. Exactly.
It's different than
right. It's proving. Exactly. So it's proving that there's a fundamental doubling that happens by birds, even though bats is a carbon of birds. Kachas, I get this by birds is always doubled. Whenever it's a, even though it's takashvei, because by how do we know that concept? The Yitzchakas in the Oila, right? How do we prove a concept? No, I'm saying the Gemara. How does Ger learn it from Yoledes? The Ma'aseh takashvei, right? Yoledes is not a din to double up. It's not this Oila. Okay, say it, but does state in the Gemara, right? Does state that we learn that there's a din that birds double up. Yeah.
It's still shver because like Lamaisi can bring a single bird.
As in a double. When it's a chayva, it's in a double. It's taka very shver, but as I state, right, taka has to work. I agree with you. That's why in the Nahavim it's much more geshmak, because in the Nahavim there was a carbon dafka birds, so we're left looking around. Oh, what's it analogous to? Okay, let's plug in your letters. But the maskana that it's only birds. Okay, so that will be that. For our schus for learning tzaddikim, kayadua mefursim, those who mishtatim this year are going to have a year of bracha batzlach and Yeshua's gedolos. You lucked out. And you're going to bring them with you. I don't want to give away who you are over here because I'm talking to publish the shiur, but Mr. Hashem, you should bring this as Yeshua to share them with the whole Klal Yisrael, with Eretz Yisrael. And this Eis Tzav El Yaakov Menuni Vashea. Maybe we'll end with a short word on tzaddikim and Agoda. What are tzaddikim on the Purim? Do you know why? What are tzaddikim on Purim? What?
There's one.
What are tzaddikim on Purim? So I'll tell you. If you have to go. Okay. Why are we tzaddikim on Purim? Because the Mishnah says in the Shkolim that the person in charge of the Kinem in the Beis HaMikdash was Mordechai. Okay? But it doesn't call him Mordechai. It calls him Psachia. Why we call him Psachia, says the Mishnah? Pesach Ko. He had a godly mouth. He was able to open his mouth and speak in 70 languages. Mordechai knew 70 languages, so if it was called Pesach, he could open up and speak. And in the context of his job in the Beis HaMikdash, to be in charge of the birds. I mean, he passed with these shayas. This whole stuff is very complicated because you have all these cases flying around and birds getting mixed up. This is easy stuff what we're doing here. Soon, next year, coming years, it's going to get harder. Now it's still easy because you get to the case of Tarubis. The kids are nice. So why is he called Psachia? Because his job, Psachia, Mordechai, who's so called because he knew the languages, was in charge of the birds, are passing with these complicated shayas. Fine. So now, the obvious question is, why are we calling him Psach? First of all, why is Mordechai's job the birds in the city? What's that to do with Mordechai that we know from the Megillah? And also, why are we calling him Psachia? Because of his knowledge of the languages in the context of the birds. Okay? So this is all a shtigatay. It'll take 2 hours, but I'll give you the nekuda without all the background. The Sechtes Kinim, this whole business of talking about what's the halacha when birds mix up. A lot of the cases in this Sechta, literally, the odds of them happening are like 1 in a trillion. I'll give you a case. One of the cases in Mishnah, we just learned about Kinim. So this is my go-to case. A cane means a set of birds, right? So the Mishnah talks about the following. What if you have 7 sets of birds? One is made up of 2 birds, and as we just learned, there's all chayv we're talking about. Echad chatas, echad ad. One is made up of 4 birds, which means 2 chatas, 2 ad. But we don't know which are which. One of them is 6 birds, one of them is 8 birds, one of them is 10 birds, one of them is 12, 14. And then one bird from set number 1, which has 2 birds, and it flies to set number 2. And then a bird flies from set number 2 to set number 1. Okay, we don't know which one. Wait, listen. Then from 3 to 4, 4 to 5, from 5 to 6, from 6 to 7. Then from 7 to 6 to 5 to 4 to 3 to 2 to 1. Then again, same thing, again and again and again.
It's like Mardukah.
Yeah, but literally there is now one Mishnah in Shas that talks about such a crazy case. What's going on over here? Never happened. Kitzah Maisa, the point is that Masechtas Kinim is a big mashal. What's it a mashal for? The birds that jump around, they get mixed up. Birds are famous for their chirping. Klal Yisrael jumps around and gets mixed up in the umis. And what happens is we pick up the shivim l'shonis. We start talking goyish. We pick up a little here, a little there. Mordechai's koyach was, he's able to take that and put that all back together again and make out of that a clarity and a koyach tefillah that's unique. Built up of that koyach dibur, that's a mix of all the different languages of all the people of the world. He can make something good out of that. So the whole Mazechta is, Mordechai was basic in this because this is a remez to his thing of talking Shem Moshe. Talking Shem Moshe doesn't mean stand, oh, you can talk Shem Moshe. It means you're able to understand the good in each culture, in each nation, and you're able to put it all, and then to mix it together, the Gemara says means you can put it all together and make something great out of it. So that's the word that I spoke, this is in my Sefer Mishnas Yaakov. But what I realized recently, just a cell phone, it's very interesting. Okay, very nice. Kingdom is a remez for this. So strange. So therefore we should learn this. Like, right, therefore we have a Masechta about it, because it's a remez. So tell me the type. Why give me your Muslim? Think of it like this. Just like me and you and every Pashto has mitzvahs and Torah about the important things, right? We have to remember mitzvahs, very important. So what do? We have mitzvahs, matzah, we have Masechtas Pesachim, the Torah to be tzaddikim. Since Mordechai had his special personal mitzvahs, personal focus of this shivim l'shonis things, that was his business. That was his avodas Hashem, was to mix up all these languages and put them back together. So because of that, he had to develop a mitzvah and a chelik of Torah that's going to be the Torah and the mitzvah that's going to be meramis to that. Same way we have mitzvahs that are meramis to things we do. So Mordechai needed mitzvahs to be meramis to his special avodah. So he developed this area of Torah because you needed to have a chelik of Torah to be tzaddikim, because we always have to have a chelik of Torah to be tzaddikim, that's important, but he needed to have a mitzvah. So he went to the Beis HaMikdash and he passed in bird shilas because he wanted to be busy with the birds, because he wanted a remez and a symbol for what he's really thinking about, which is what happens when kodesh mixed together, and how do you make something nice out of them, and how do you work out the taruvas of Kaisel Bein Umas. Okay, Lemaisa, this is why the Geula is Tolim Seftes Kinim, because if you know how to put together Shalom Shais, means you know how to bring your soul back out of Golos, and you know how to bring the Goyim to Klal Yisrael and to be Malad and Itzaitis. Yeah. So that's basically it. So that's why that's what Masechta is so powerful and so important, and especially today. There's Manenu. We should get a Mordechai who's going to bring the Geula and bring us all back to Eretz Yisrael. Maybe Amen.
You know what occurred to me?
1 second, let's get this off.
Yeah.